Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We're up to Perek Dalid Mishnah Yud Aleph. Today's Mishnah should be Lev Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Bracha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden Amen. Just to quickly recap from yesterday's Mishnah, Mishnah number 10, we discussed a person who presses 354 grams of dried terumah figs in the mouth of a jug containing dried chulin figs, and he doesn't know in the mouth of which jug of chulin figs he pressed them. We have a doubt now if it can be permitted or not. So Rabbi Eliezer says, even though the terumah figs are definitely in the mouth of one of the jugs, we view the terumah figs as if they are separated and spread out throughout the jug, and therefore the lower figs in the jug nullify the litra of terumah that is among the upper figs. But Rabbi Yeshua says the terumah is not nullified unless there are 100 more jugs, so that the upper figs in all of those jugs can by themselves nullify the terumah. And the basis behind their logic, we explained yesterday, is that Rabbi Eliezer holds that when the figs do not look different from the terumah, they can be combined even if they're physically separated, whereas Rabbi Yeshua held that they can be counted as long as they're not separated, even if they look different. So today's Mishnah is going to continue with another case in which this dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua applies. The Mishnah says, Se'at terumah shenafla al pi megura ukfa'a. If a se'ah of terumah fell on top of chulin grain at the opening of a storeroom, ukfa'a, and one skimmed off the top layer of grain. So the Mefarshim explain that terumah became mixed with chulin at the opening of the storeroom. It cannot be identified, but was clearly somewhere at the opening. So in an effort to remove the terumah, the top layer, which is a mixture of terumah and chulin, was skimmed off. However, the grain that was removed contained only part of the terumah, and terumah remained in the storeroom as well. Rabbi Eliezer says, if the skimmed layer among with the rest of the grain in the storeroom contains 100 se'ah of chulin, aside from the se'ah of terumah totaling 101 se'ah, the terumah is nullified in 101 total se'ah. And the Mefarshim explain that Rabbi Eliezer is following his view in yesterday's Mishnah, where he holds that even though we know that the bottom of the pile contains only chulin, we count all the grain towards the 100 parts needed to nullify the terumah. Now, this obviously applies if the top layer was not skimmed off at all. Rabbi Eliezer is teaching us a chidush, that this halakha applies even when one skims off the top layer and attempts to remove the terumah, therefore showing that the bottom part of the storeroom is chulin. I would have thought that this prevents a terumah from being nullified by the produce on the bottom of the storeroom, which is certainly chulin, because that was your intention. Your intention was, by skimming it off only the top, you're showing that the bottom is chulin. Nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer is teaching us that the bottom part is still included in the count of 100 parts, and the terumah is nullified. Rabbi Yeshua says, Lo ta'aleh, it is not nullified, since the bottom of the pile, which is definitely chulin, is not included in the doubt. And like this, we see Rabbi Yeshua is consistent with his view in yesterday's Mishnah, where he holds that if we know that the terumah is on top of the mixture, the chulin on the bottom cannot be included in the 100 se'ah required to nullify the mixture. So Rabbi Yeshua says, what should you do in this case? Se'at terumah shenafla al pi megura yikpi'ena. In this case, where a se'ah of terumah fell on top of chulin grain at the opening of a storeroom, yikpi'ena, one should skim off enough of the top layer of the grain so that all the terumah has definitely been removed. The rest of the grain will be permitted because it's definitely chulin. And the Mefarshim explain, what does it mean skim off enough? Meaning skim off more from the top until you're certain that you removed all the terumah, and then the remainder would be permitted to an un-Kohen. But the Mishnah asks, if this is the case, that removing some of the grain can permit the rest, in which case did the Chachamim say that in order to nullify terumah that became mixed in the grain in the storeroom, there has to be one part terumah in 101 total parts? Why not just skim off the terumah and then the rest will be allowed? So the Mishnah answers, Im enu yadua im biluloten o la'ayin nafla. The Chachamim required 101 total parts where it's not known whether the terumah and chulin became mixed together or where the terumah fell to begin with. Meaning the Mefarshim explain that in the first case where it's not known whether the terumah and chulin became mixed together, after the terumah fell on top of the pile, there is reason to suspect that the terumah may have become mixed into the lower part of the pile, so removing the top layer won't necessarily remove the terumah. Or where it's not known where in the pile the terumah fell to begin with. Since it could have fallen anywhere in the pile, we cannot skim off the place where it fell. And that's when the Chachamim would require the 101 total amount. And the Rav tells us, Halakha Rabbi Yeshua, the Halakha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. That is in Rabotai Mishnah Yud Aleph. Mishnah Bet now continues the discussion of the Halakha that Terumah becomes nullified in 100 parts of Chulin. Shte kupot ushte migurot. If there were 2 boxes or 2 storerooms with each box or storeroom containing 50 se'ah of Chulin, right? Shte kupot ushte migurot. If there were 2 boxes or 2 storerooms with each box or storeroom containing 50 se'ah of Chulin, meaning each container has approximately 50 se'ah, so that's a total of 100 se'ah between the 2 containers. Shenafla se'ah terumah letoch echad mehen, ve'en yadua le'ezu mehen nafla, and a se'ah of terumah fell into one of them, and you don't know into which one of them it fell. Ma'alot zo et zo, the halakha is that they nullify each other, meaning the contents of the boxes or storerooms are considered as if they are joined together to nullify the terumah. And the Mepharshim explain, since there is a total of 100 se'ah of chulin between the 2 containers, their contents are permitted to a non-Kohen after removing 1 se'ah, which is given to a Kohen. Now, a person can remove the se'ah from either box or storehouse, or even half of the se'ah from one, and the second half from the other. The Chachamim, the reason for this, the Chachamim considered the contents of both boxes or storerooms as if they are combined, based on the fact that all of the grain in both boxes or storerooms is part of the doubt. However, they allowed it only if both containers are in one location or if they may eventually be combined. Mepharshim explained, the Art School State, it brings down that nowadays boxes are moved from place to place and their contents are at times combined. Therefore, even if the boxes were not in the same house but in the same town, the combined volume of both boxes determines whether the terumah that fell into one of them is nullified. However, storerooms cannot be moved from place to place, therefore they're not considered combined unless they're in one house. Now, the ruling of the Tana Kama, this opinion that the contents of both the boxes or storerooms are viewed as being combined, is limited to boxes that are in the same town or storerooms in the same house, like we said, because they might be combined. The Mishnah now cites a Tana who is more lenient. Rabbi Shimon says, Afilu hem b'shtei ayerot. Even if the 2 boxes or storerooms are in different cities, ma'alot zo et zo, the halakha is that they nullify each other, because Rabbi Shimon holds, as long as the contents of both boxes or storerooms are part of a single doubt, they are viewed as being combined to nullify the terumah. The fact that it's unlikely that they'll ever become combined is not a factor, and the Rav tells us, V'en halakha ki Rabbi Shimon, the halakha does not follow Rabbi Shimon. Rather, the contents of the boxes or storerooms have to be are only viewed as combined if they're in the same towns. The boxes are in the same towns or storerooms in the same house. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.